And away we go, episode 1250 of the Galdi podcast. It is Friday, January 30th, 2026. And yes, this is episode 1250 of this podcast. We are halfway to episode 2500. And this episode, 1250, is for January 30th, 2026, what is the 43rd anniversary of the Washington Redskins' first of 3 Super Bowl wins. January 30th, 1983, the Skins' 27-17 win over the Miami Dolphins at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California in Super Bowl 17. The Skins overcame a 17-10 halftime deficit, won the second half 17-0. The Skins held the Dolphins to just 176 total net yards of offense, 76 of which came on a first quarter 76-yard touchdown pass from Dolphins quarterback David Woodley to receiver Jimmy Cefalo. And the Dolphins' other touchdown in the game was a late second quarter 98-yard kickoff return for a touchdown by defensive back Fulton Walker. And when it came to the Skins' offense in the game, the offense was highlighted by the single greatest play in Skins history, running back John Riggins' fourth quarter 4th and 1 43-yard I-formation handoff touchdown run on which El Rigo broke through an attempted tackle by cornerback Don McNeil, who had stumbled as the play was developing, and he had stumbled thanks to tight end Clint Didier having gone in motion. The iconic photo of McNeil falling off Riggins while holding on to Riggins' jersey is an all-timer. Here is the television call of the play. Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen on NBC.
Like a couple of expectant fathers, Shula pacing the sidelines, Gibbs irritated.
There's Bill Arnsparger. Of course, he's made his defensive call. Let's see who'll win this battle of strategy.
Riggins. He's going to go all the way unless Blackwood can catch him, and he can't.
What a tremendous play, but the key to this play was motion. The motion man coming across and turning around, Don McNeil, cornerback, running with him, slipped and fell. His responsibility to get back to the outside to contain Riggins. He could not get there until the last second. Riggins ran through an arm tackle and carried it all the way into the end zone.
Yes, he did. John Riggins for that game had 38 carries for 166 yards and a touchdown. Also had a reception for 15 yards. He was named Super Bowl 17 MVP. Hello and welcome to this Friday installment of the Galdi podcast. Next segment, a very special guest, legendary sports writer Richard Justice. Richard worked for the Washington Post from February 1986 to July 2000, including serving as a Redskins beat reporter and columnist. He was a Redskins beat reporter for the Post for the team's 1991 Super Bowl championship season. And we, with Richard, are going to discuss 2 main topics. A, what's going on with the Washington Post, which is greatly reducing, if not eliminating, its sports department? And B, his time covering the Redskins. So Richard is going to give us terrific insight on the Post, where and how newspapers have gone wrong, what the future of sports media looks like, and more. And Richard is going to give us tremendous stories on covering the Skins, including fantastic behind-the-scenes stuff on the greatest head coach in not just Skins history, but Washington, D.C. area sports history, Joe Gibbs. Richard is a magnificent storyteller. Prepare yourself to be both informed and entertained. Legendary sports writer Richard Justice, next segment. And also on the show, I'll talk Washington Capitals and Washington Wizards. Each team won on Thursday night. The Caps a 4-3 shootout win at the Detroit Red Wings, despite blowing a 3-1 third period lead as they gave up 2 even-strength goals over the final 140 of the third period. The Wizards, a 109-99 win over the Milwaukee Bucks at Capital One Arena on Thursday night, what was John Wall celebration night. Before we get to feedback, some Washington Commanders coaching staff news. Reports late Thursday morning that Commanders defensive pass game coordinator Jason Simmons is leaving to join the Pittsburgh Steelers, though not as defensive coordinator. We on Wednesday had reports that Simmons was to interview for the Steelers defensive coordinator job, but we on Thursday morning had reports that the Steelers are hiring Patrick Graham as defensive coordinator. He spent the last 4 seasons as the Las Vegas Raiders defensive coordinator. He was the first reported candidate to interview for the Commanders defensive coordinator vacancy this month. A vacancy that, of course, is going, reportedly, to Minnesota Vikings defensive passing game coordinator / defensive backs coach Durante Jones. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You could email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Email from Russell Fugit on Durante Jones. So we on this podcast this week have gotten terrific insight on Jones. Wednesday show, episode 1248, fantasy football expert and Minnesota Vikings media personality Paul Charchian. He gave us a deep dive on Jones in terms of his time with the Vikings. Thursday show, episode 1249, Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room. He gave us all 22 style analysis of what to expect schematically from Jones. Writes Russ, who is a very successful guy and loyal listener of this podcast and whose dad played for the Redskins. So Russ is the son of Gene Fugit, who was a tight end for the Skins for the 1976 through 1979 seasons. I went to high school with Russ, so we both went to Georgetown Prep High School in North Bethesda, Maryland. Don't say Rockville, Maryland. No, it is North Bethesda, Maryland, writes Russ. I agree that this is a bold but perhaps brilliant move by Coach Quinn, securing 2 up-and-coming coordinators who will be highly motivated to succeed and position themselves for head coaching opportunities in the future. Jones has an impressive track record of improving defensive secondaries and increasing turnovers. Needless to say, this could be a huge upgrade for us, and more turnovers would mean more chances for the offense, which would mean more opportunities for us to go blow. How you like me now? Thank you for the email, Russ. Yes, the rallying cry on this podcast for David Blau, who the Commanders on January 10th announced having promoted from assistant quarterbacks coach to offensive coordinator, is the great line from LL Cool J in the great song Mama Said Knock You Out. Blau, how you like me now? Yeah, Blau, how you like me now? Durante Jones has an excellent history in terms of his secondaries generating takeaways, but, the same is true for the Commanders' last defensive coordinator, Joe Witt Jr., and you look at Witt and Jones, each guy is 47. Each guy got the job of Commanders' defensive coordinator off a terrific run as a defensive passing game coordinator / defensive backs coach. Witt with the Dallas Cowboys, Jones with the Minnesota Vikings. Each guy has an excellent history in terms of his secondaries generating takeaways. The things that we're saying about Jones, we said about Witt, and we should keep that in mind. The talent on this defense needs to be a lot better. A lot of pressure on Commanders general manager Adam Peters to have a good offseason. Email from Kim off me during the opening segment of Tuesday's show, episode 1247, responding to an email about whether Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels needs to put on weight, writes Kim. Hi, Al. Following up on the email from a fan of the show, I still wonder what Jayden meant when he said at the closing presser that he was going to work on his body from head to toe. I guess no one will know for sure, but I think / suspect he may wish to add bulk / muscle from a physique standpoint. He really took a pounding this season, and you gotta believe he wants to be out there playing and not on the sidelines. I am sure he has given this much thought, as there is no way he could come away from this season without being frustrated. It is hard to find stats on his height and weight over his college years, but I did find that at Arizona State, he was 6'3" and 185 pounds. After that, all I see is 6'4" and 210. His closest height / weight complement would be Joe Burrow at 6'4", 215. I hope Jayden does add some weight, as I do think it'll help him sustain certain hits that inevitably will come his way. Thank you for the email, Kim. What Jayden Daniels said during his end-of-season session with reporters on January 5th has not gotten much attention. I, on episode 1232, talked about what Daniels said. He said that a goal for him in the 2026 offseason was, quote, rebuilding myself from the ground up, end quote. Here was him saying that.
So, that's kind of the focus for me in this offseason. Is just rebuilding myself from the ground up and, hopefully go out there, and that's the most important thing, to be available for my team.
Yeah, that stood out to me, quote, rebuilding myself from the ground up, end quote. Now, Jaden Daniels did not expound on what he meant by that, but that sounds dramatic, doesn't it? Quote, rebuilding myself from the ground up, end quote. What did he mean by that? What will that mission result in him doing? What changes might that mission bring? Quote, rebuilding myself from the ground up, end quote. Hey, if you happen to be listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can write a review of the podcast saying that you like it. The review can be just a sentence or two, but the reviews help out the podcast a lot. Thank you for doing them. The Washington Post began publishing on December 6th, 1877. Yes, 1877, more than 148 years ago. But the Washington Post, like many traditional media outlets, is struggling big time. The Post in 2023 reportedly lost $77 million. The Post in 2024 reportedly lost $100 million. And the reporting for days now has been that hundreds of layoffs and a big-time restructuring are happening for the Post, including the sports department being drastically cut down, if not eliminated. A lot of the reporting has come from Dylan Byers, who is a founding partner and senior correspondent at Puck. January 24th, Post on X, quote, massive layoffs coming to Washington Post. Rumor inside Post is that Sports Desk could be shuttered entirely. Foreign Desk will be hit hard too, end quote. January 26th, Post on X, quote, the Washington Post cuts, which could affect up to 300 employees, are a culmination of 2-year effort to transform paper. Will Lewis wants to focus on a few core areas, NatSec, politics, etc., while all but abandoning topics without adequate demand, including sports, end quote. Will Lewis has been the publisher and CEO of the Washington Post since January 2024, and NatSec, N-A-T-S-E-C, as I'm sure many of you know, is the common abbreviation for national security. Also, media insider Eric Wemple of the New York Times, he on January 26th in a post on X, quote, more on the WAPO situation. The sports section was told not to book travel arrangements for its Nationals beat writers to cover spring training. According to two sources, there are 2 beat writers for the Nationals, end quote. Additionally, if you are on X, you perhaps have seen a number of Washington Post writers posting about how good the writers at the Post are and using the hashtag #SaveThePost. And we on Thursday morning learned that the Washington Post's White House team, which is not considered at risk among upcoming cuts at the Post, sent a letter to owner Jeff Bezos seeking to protect other sections of the Post, including sports, Metro, and arts. The Washington Post is owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. He bought the Post in 2013. I have lived in the Washington, D.C. area my entire life. I'm 46. I, as a child of the late 1980s and early 1990s, grew up on many things in this area in terms of sports media. Sports Radio 570 WTEM, Sports Call with Ken Beatrice, weeknights on 630 WMAL. Frank Herzog, Sonny Jurgensen, and Sam Huff calling Washington Redskins games on 630 WMAL. John Miller, Chuck Thompson, and Joe Angel calling Orioles games on 1090 WBAL in Baltimore. Home Team Sports, HDS. The sportscasts of Glenn Brenner on WUSA 9 and George Michael on NBC4. On and on I could go. And yes, a big part of my sports education as a kid in the D.C. area was reading the Washington Post. But if we're being honest, the Washington Post of today is not the Washington Post of yesteryear. I personally am not a fan of the sports section in recent years. Way too much focus on national sports, including Olympic sports, not enough focus on the Washington Commanders and the other teams of the area. I personally am not interested in the Post coverage of national sports. If I want coverage of national sports, I go to ESPN.com. I'm also not interested in the Post coverage of, figure skating and gymnastics. Way too much of that stuff in recent years. I mean, maybe this is just me, but I just don't care. I want coverage of my teams, the teams of this region, the teams that I talk about on this podcast. Commanders, Nationals, Orioles, Capitals, Wizards, Maryland basketball and Maryland football, Georgetown basketball, Navy football, etc. That's what I want. And that's what the Post has gotten away from in recent years. And so it, for me, has stopped being a must-read. There is a lot that goes into why what is happening with the Post is happening, including, of course, the changing media landscape. And so it is a pleasure to welcome to the Al Galdi podcast for the first time legendary sports writer Richard Justice. He worked for the Washington Post from February 1986 to July 2000, including serving as a Redskins beat reporter and columnist. He was a Redskins beat reporter for the Post for the team's 1991 Super Bowl championship season. Also, Richard worked for the Baltimore Sun from February 1984 to February 1986. You can follow Richard on X at Richard Justice. Richard, it is a pleasure to speak to you. How are you?
I'm good, and thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm excited to get your thoughts. I know that you've been following what's going on with the Washington Post. What's your reaction?
Well, given the state of newspapers, given that background, I guess it's not surprising. But you have to understand, nobody does a better job of covering the sports than the Washington Post. And, I'm an old guy now, and I look at the way they've covered the Commanders, especially the way those guys, Barry Sirluga and Chelsea Janes, Jesse Daugherty, have covered the Nationals. I mean, I was in awe of their coverage during the World Series. But the background for me is, like, I got there in February of 1986 to the Post, and I was in awe of the place. I got the desk that had been vacated by John Ed Bradley. He'd gone off to the bayou to drink whiskey and be William Faulkner. He wrote these stories that you just lingered over every sentence. And I look up one day, like everybody of my generation of journalists came of age during the Kennedy assassination when newspapers were essential reading, and especially Woodward and Bernstein. Like, I idolized those guys. Bob Woodward would walk through the sports department, and I go, oh my God, there's Woodward. He was our weekend editor, our weekend Sunday editor, every once a month for years and years, and worked with him. And David Marinus, people like that. And you just can't believe that you're in a newsroom. I grew up in the smallest town in Texas you can imagine. I worked at every little crap newspaper in Texas, and to get to the Washington Post was almost beyond comprehension. Let me tell you, and I tell you a story. Like I'd be at the '86 World Series, for example. I'm there, and George Solomon, the sports editor, the guy who hired me, took a chance on me, and he would bring the sports section up the day that he came up on the Metroliner, and he held the sports section in two hands. I'm sorry, the whole newspaper, in two hands, like it was this precious thing, and that's the way we looked at it. And when I first got there, I would go to a mall outside Baltimore and drink coffee and just open the paper like one page at a time. I was so in awe, like, I get to be part of this paper with this great style section. I get to work with Kornheiser and Wilbon and Feinstein, these guys that, I idolize. So I that's my background. And I'm telling you, I never walked in there into that newsroom a day that I didn't feel blessed to be there. Now, I always was tugged to go back to Texas, whatever that relentless tug is. You want to come back here and be able to complain about the politicians and the weather and everything else. But I was so lucky that George Solomon took a chance on me and got to get to know people like Ben Bradley and Leonard Downey and Bob Kaiser. It was amazing. And, like, I don't know if you feel this way, but you never want to work at a place where you're the smartest guy in the room. I never did. And sadly, I think a couple of times I did. At the Post, you were overwhelmed by the talent and the intellect around you, and the dedication to the craft of journalism. And I was, it was just one night. Kornheiser and I went to the National Press Club one night for a thing. And I don't know, I'm guessing he got an award and I didn't, but I don't remember. But we walk out, And we walk this circuitous route back to the Post building. We pass, there's the Washington Monument between, you can see it between the streets there. And he looks at me and says, can you imagine living in a greater city than this? And that, I mean, that's the way we felt. We were at George Solomon was once having a breakfast with with Dave Kindred, who worked at the Post, a great columnist. And as you do to people of a certain age, Dave said, how much longer are you going to do this, George? You know, because everybody's going to move up. Everybody's going to find a job they're not good at. And George looked at Dave and said, look, I got the greatest publisher in the world. I got the greatest newspaper in the world. I'm in the greatest city in the world. Why would I ever give this up? And when you backed off the day-to-day complaints about this and that, that's how we all felt. And there was such energy in what George created there. I was in there early one morning, and I hear he's on the phone to Tom Boswell. And he's telling him, you got to write on this. You got to write today on this. I know you're not scheduled to write, but you got to write on this. You're the conscience of the section. I'm telling you, Al, 10 minutes later, he's on the phone to Kornheiser, and he's saying, now you need to write on this. I need you in the newspaper tomorrow because you're the conscience of the section. And when he got off the phone with Tony, I go, you call him Feinstein next? And he looked up and said, no, he's not the conscience. But that's what we had. And it was, George wanted the story. George, I think, took pride in the fact Post section leaders got a bonus if they came in under budget. I think this is true. George was so proud of the fact that he never came under budget. You know, he, like when they would clamp down, George, you're way over, you're way over. He would say, okay, you can't travel anymore. And then he would say, but you can go to New York. And you don't want to say to George, by the time we pay for the hotel and the Metro liner and this and that, that's not cheap. But I'm in Wrigley Field one night, as an example, writing a story on the Cubs. And George says, I get a call from the desk. Emilio Ruiz Garcia says to me, George is very interested in the Atlanta Braves. They'd won 13 in a row. They were winning their 13th in a row that night. They were at Dodger Stadium. And I go, Emilio, what are you saying? He goes, I'm just telling you, George is very interested in the Atlanta Braves. Next morning at 7, I'm at O'Hare on the getting on a flight to Dodger Stadium. And similarly, I'm in the Packers locker room during the playoffs one year. And I'm begging Reggie White, can I come over to your house? Can I come over to your house? Come on, blah, 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 blah. And he's in a terrible mood, no. And a Packers PR guy comes up to me and gives me a note, call your office. And I call and goes, George is very interested in the 49ers. Now, the 49ers are not in Green Bay. They're quite a ways away. But I knew what that meant. And I hightailed it out of there and was at the 49ers complex the next day. As I'm leaving the locker room, Reggie White comes over and goes, okay, look, follow me home. And I go, I don't have to follow you anywhere, buddy, big boy. But that was what we had. George cared so much about the quality of the section, the quality of the people he hired. And he wanted a collaborative environment about it. You know, I tell people all the time, you watch Pardon the Interruption. Well, those of us, and I saw someone wrote this, Rachel Nichols, I believe, wrote this on social media recently. That show, Pardon the Interruption, we sat there and watched it. It could not be more honest because we heard Mike and Tony have those exact arguments for most of the 14 years I was there.
Hearing you detail the free spending ways of the Washington Post during your time there, it's hard not to think about what has been reported, that the Post in 2023 lost $77 million and in 2024 lost $100 million. I am in no way happy to see people lose their jobs, but something had to change. Those are staggering losses for a media outlet. Those are unsustainable losses.
Yeah, but the reason you buy the Washington Post is you're buying something bigger than you. You're signing on to the mission. And I think I felt like a lot of other people, I've told people this, when Jeff Bezos bought the Post, I said, that's the guy that will buy it. And for the first X number of years, he ran it like he simply wanted to be the caretaker of a great Washington institution. I'm telling you, Al, the Grahams were adored in the newsroom. And I saw Paul Ferry wrote that when he got a call, something's happening, the Post is going to be sold. He didn't believe it because the Grahams would never sell, but Don had to sell the Post because the world had changed too much. Bob Kaiser, who was managing editor for a lot of the years I was there, had gone to a conference in Salt Lake City and came back and wrote like a 10-page memo on the coming electronic newspaper. And no one, the internet was just in its infancy. You couldn't get your mind around it. And Post circulation declined like, I'm making up a number here, like 8 newspapers in 1 month. And they looked at that and they went, what's going on here? That's weird. That never has happened. That must be just a blip or a statistical anomaly or something like that. And that was the beginning of the end. And when the slide started, it was hard to stop it. But I would say, Jeff Bezos hired Marty Barron, one of the great newspaper editors in the history of the country. I mean, he's one guy that could stand beside Ben Bradley, who was the greatest newspaper editor of our time. And they did unbelievable work in the first Trump term, and they hired sports writers, and all the hires they made in sports, like Barry Serluga, people like that, Chuck Culpepper, were these people that just were they were the best of the best. And as with George, the philosophy was, we're going to go where the story is. And for whatever reason, Jeff Bezos, what's his net worth? 100 billion? I mean, it's a number that you and I can't even comprehend. And he could finance the Post if he wanted to. Now, the other side of that is the New York Times invested in the product. Invest. They were way out front. The podcast, they were in the podcast sphere before anybody, and their podcast, The Daily, is, I think, top 5 every tracking metric. The Post is going to go the other way. So I feel sad. And also for people like that I know there, like Chelsea Janes and Mark Maskey, Barry, I can't really get my mind around it. I can't get my mind around that you're going to open the Washington Post and there's not a sports section. Now, I'm sure they're going to quote the data. It doesn't do X, Y, and Z. International reporting doesn't do X, Y, and Z. But a newspaper is supposed to reflect the community, the whole of the community. And like, this, you were there. People get Washington wrong. People that live in Omaha don't get Washington. Like, they see Washington as Ted Cruz and Mike Johnson. No. Washington is people that live and die with the Commanders and cuss Dan Snyder and all of that. I mean, care deeply. I'm on a treadmill in White Flint or White Oak. I was living in Silver Spring. I was on a treadmill one day, and this retired cop is waiting for me like this. And he's going, this football team, I get off the treadmill, he goes, this thing's driving me crazy. This team is driving me crazy. In a 7-day span, from Monday to Sunday, the Redskins had beaten, I believe it was the Broncos and the Eagles or somebody at home. I believe it was 2 big games they won. I said, what are you talking about, Willie? They're kicking butt. And he goes, these third down conversions are killing me. It's gonna come back to bite them. But he cared deeply, and I knew when I covered the Orioles, I could tell that even though it was a Redskins town, they cared about the baseball too, from a more global perspective. And then when I got on the Redskins beat, holy smoke! I mean, the interest in it was hard to comprehend. George once joked that Ben Bradley, we could run the World Series statistics upside down and Ben wouldn't notice. But if we had one mistake in the Redskins depth chart, he was going to fly into a rage. But he cared. He cared about the product.
Much more with Richard Justice in moments, but if you have a case, contact the Nace Law Group, accident and injury lawyers. If you feel that you've been wronged, if you think that you've been wronged but aren't sure, contact the Nace Law Group, accident and injury lawyers, and mention that Al Galdi sent you. You could call 202-902-7611. You could also visit Washington, D.C., injurylawyers.com, and submit for a free, no-obligation case review. The Nace Law Group features compassionate lawyers and zealous advocates for its clients, led by the great Chris Nace and founded in 1979. The Nace Law Group is a Washington, D.C.-based family law firm that handles medical malpractice, personal injury, birth injury, legal malpractice, and consumer protection cases, offering aggressive advocacy for victims in Washington, D.C. and West Virginia. The Nace Law Group is outstanding. It will fight for you and your family. The Nace Law Group has recovered millions of dollars for the sick and injured. If you have a case, contact the Nace Law Group. Call 202-902-7611 or visit Washington, D.C., injurylawyers.com and tell the Nace Law Group that Al Galdi sent you. The Nace Law Group, accident and injury lawyers. We're talking with legendary sports writer Richard Justice, who worked for the Washington Post from February 1986 to July 2000, including serving as a Redskins beat reporter and columnist. He was a Redskins beat reporter for the Post for the team's 1991 Super Bowl championship season. You are not just a veteran of sports journalism, you also are a forward thinker. You, in December 2011, made the jump from being a columnist for the Houston Chronicle to being a columnist for MLB.com. You more than 14 years ago made the jump from traditional media to new media. I think that most people understand that traditional media is dying and new media is rising. Radio is dying. Podcasts are rising. Television is dying. Streaming is rising. Newspapers and magazines are dying. Digital outlets like Substack are rising. Where do you see sports media going over the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think there will be answers. The Athletic has filled some of those answers. And I assume there's going to be somebody is going to cover sports in the District of Columbia. Somebody is going to cover Maryland basketball and do a good job at it. I was the lead sports columnist at the Houston Chronicle for 8 years. And the reason I went to MLB, first of all, 8 years I'd said everything I had to say. I was starting to repeat myself. The other thing is I thought our coverage was going to be more sports specific. And some of the criticism of legacy media is true. I've seen things at MLB that would amaze you in terms of marketing, what people want to read, what the data is on. They would test drive headlines during a World Series game. This headline is getting attention. This is not. This story does well. This story does not. And it wasn't. They never asked me to write anything I didn't want to write. But I do think this idea that we set, and it's fair criticism. Sometimes we sit in our ivory towers and dictate what people ought to be interested in. The world's changing. At the Houston Chronicle, I wasn't there for this, but they had a scoreboard like what stories are doing well, and you got to pound it and pound it and pound it what people care about. But now the Chronicle being one example is that the staff cuts have so decimated the newsroom, just trying to, and Hearst is far better to work for than some of these other places, and that they have to adjust. But you asked me where it was going. I'm telling you, there's going to be an outlet that does a great job of covering the Commanders, but whoever does it is going to have to absorb financial losses because we haven't figured out yet how to monetize the web. And MLB.com is the model for all of it, and because they take great pride in the editorial content. But you have to understand, like, it's all expenditures. It's not a lot of revenue. And the way we got by for years was this genius named Bob Bowman invented a streaming service that they sold Disney for $6 billion or some number like that. That everything changed with us after that sale because then we were accountable to the bottom line, and no one's figured that out yet.
You worked for the Baltimore Sun in the 1980s. They're in Baltimore now as something called the Baltimore Banner, which is an online news outlet about Baltimore and covers Baltimore sports in in-depth fashion. I wonder if something like the Baltimore Banner, to whatever extent you're familiar with that, rises up in Washington, D.C.
I know a lot of it, and we that same trust, the Arnold Foundation here was one of the big funders. And my old editor at the Houston Chronicle, Jeff Cohen, runs it, and he's done a lot of these startups. One was here in Houston Landing, and it was a complete flop. And they did great work. Now, I will say this. A friend of mine in the business said the Landing did journalism, school scandals, civic scandals, but it was too dark. You got to have some barbecue. You got to have some Jose Altuve in there. And he said, I have numbers I have to reach. He works for one of the slash and burn chains. He goes, but you have to write about barbecue sometimes to attract people to your serious journalism. You have to have, and that's to me, is the appeal of sports. You have to have Chuck Culpepper go cover the national championship game because people are going to sit down and read it. And they're going to linger. He's like John Ed Bradley in that you're going to linger over every sentence. I don't know what you're coming at. What do you expect to come out of this with if you remove the lighter touch? You know, the style section of the Post for a million years was the section in the United States of America that had the greatest writing, the greatest pulse on the culture of the time. And but the bottom line has changed. The Houston Chronicle once paid all its bills. It was for years owned by a trust with the classified ad section. And now if you're going to sell your car, you're not going to buy a classified ad. You're going to go to Craigslist or somebody like, or CarMax or something. You're going to go to the internet, and it's devastating.
And something that I come back to is, so the internet now has been prevalent in our lives for 30 years. If newspapers haven't figured out how to be financially viable in the internet age yet, when exactly are they going to figure that out? And maybe they're not going to figure that out. Again, it has been 30 years.
A friend of mine on the West Coast was covering a team, the Seattle Mariners. And his sports editor said to him, our deadlines are now 6:30 p.m. for the print edition, meaning no one in your readership in the Pacific Northwest, no one gets the final score. And baseball is every day. You're talking about it every day. And they wanted him to do a story, a feature, and a notebook, and this and that for the print edition. And then after the game, they wanted a complete rewrite for the web, a game story. Well, that's a 20-hour workday. He said, look, homicide detectives don't work the hours you're asking me to work. And he just quit. He said, I cannot do it. I cannot work two shifts.
The way that newspapers have been slow to react to the internet and ineffective in reacting to the internet reminds me of like Blockbuster versus Netflix. You know, Netflix saw the future and now is thriving. Blockbuster stayed stuck in the past and now is gone. I did want to ask you about covering the Redskins during their glory days, including serving as a Redskins beat reporter for the Washington Post for the team's 1991 Super Bowl championship season. When you think about your time covering the Skins, you think of what?
You know, NFL teams have gone to the Pentagon and asked about leadership. What are the qualities in leaders? I was sitting on a plane with an officer one time, and he starts talking about it. And he said, leadership is the weirdest thing. You don't know until you're in the position of leadership. We have every metric. We can we have not been able to ascertain how you measure a leader. And that brings me to Joe Gibbs. He was this squeaky voiced, squatty little guy who would, he asked NFL Films once to stop using the audio of him because all the audio ever got was, "What's going on out there? What is going on out there?" But this guy was born to lead men. Oh my God. I mean, the stories I can tell you, he calls, they're going bad one time. Lunchtime, somebody, a trainer, somebody comes down and says, every player that's been here 5 years or more in Joe Gibbs' office right now. And he tells the guys, when things were going bad in those years, it was always, he's wearing them out. He has too many old guys. They practice too hard. They did have short practices, but they knock the hell out of one another. They get a defensive tackle named Eric Williams from Detroit for the Super Bowl season. And this is when Mr. Cook had a deal with McDonald's, Jack Kent Cook, the owner of the team. And so there would be a big table full of Big Macs and quarter pounders with cheese for the players. And he thought, this is great. This is a free meal, given that, it's not exactly what the nutritionist wanted. But Eric Williams comes off the field after a Wednesday practice and goes, "My God, I didn't know that Big Mac was a pregame meal." In other words, he had never been part of a practice that was intense as that one was. So Joe tells everybody 5 years or more into Joe's office. He goes in there and he says, "Look, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this team anymore. I need you guys to tell me, do you want to take the pads off?" And they say, "No, we're Redskins. We have the pads on. We hit. We hit on Wednesday. We hit on Thursday. And that's what we do." And they would it could be snowing and 7 degrees, and Joe would run out and yell, "Redskin weather, Redskin weather, Redskin weather." But anyway, the players tell him, "No, don't take the pads off. Don't do anything. We don't care the criticism you're getting. We do what we do." And as they're coming out, one of the players told me, and my recollection, it might have been Martin Mayhew, but I can't remember exactly. One looked at the other and goes, "Man, are we a bunch of dumbasses?" He just offered us the chance to take the pads off, and we said no, we wouldn't want to do it. We didn't want to do it. And he created a core of players that the Hogs being first among equals on that. The guy won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks, and he paid attention to everything. He walks out on the field once, and it's way early, like 3 hours before the game. And Mark Rippon is warming up, his quarterback. And the fans, there's like a few fans, a knot of fans yelling, "Hey, Rippon, you suck. You suck." Joe goes over to them. Joe looks at Mark and says, "Huh." Mark goes, Rip goes, "The natives are a little restless today." Joe goes over into the stands and goes, "Who's booing our quarterback?" And they all point at one guy. And Joe looks at the guy and goes, "Look, I need you today. We need you today. You going to be with us or not?" And the guy goes, "I'm with you, coach." I mean, he would call me on Saturday and say, "Hey, you need to put in there that we need our fans in this one." I'm like, "Okay, whatever you want me to do." But he paid attention, like, we're playing at Tampa. What socks do we have to have? I don't want the wool socks in there. We're playing in Buffalo. It's going to be cold on the field. Make sure the right thing. Yeah, the right. And he just, geez. And the players like Bostic and Jacoby and Jim Lachey and Gary Clark, there's just the word, it gets, I don't even know what the word culture means, but whatever it means, they had it. And it was bigger than anything that, and Joe would always say, teams will tell you, a coach will tell you, some years you catch lightning in a bottle and some years you don't. The background in 91, when they went, I think they won their first 12, they went 17-2 that year. At the end of camp, and they sucked it. They sucked the last preseason game, and poor Buckheads had to do the interview with Joe because you've heard the story that he mentions something like, Super Bowl, and who picked us to win the Super Bowl? Who? And Buck has to say, it's Playboy. But that Monday, and this is why one other thing Joe knows, I don't want to know what the owner says. I want to know who the owner's talking to. And the owner is aware of this. And Jack King Cook has Joe on the field after Monday practice before the opening game and says, you've completely screwed this team up. And Joe, then he adds the knife. Well, what I like is a guy like that, Jimmy Johnson down in Dallas. Now, there's a guy that knows how to coach. I mean, knows how to put a team together. Joe loses his mind. He rips off his jacket, and I'm the recollection of all those years. Throws it down and says, "I am tired of hearing that." Blah 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 blah. And Mr. Cook goes, "Now, Joe, let's have a cup of coffee and settle down." But remember, people will remember, after every game, when they're 7-0, 8-0, 9-0, Joe goes, "I don't really know what's going on." He would tell the press, "The players are just sort of taking us for a ride." And only later did I understand that was his way of telling Mr. Cook, "Stay the bleep out of it. We got the right kind of guys here. We got guys you want on our team." And it was so much. It was nerve-wracking to cover them because you never felt you got out in front of the story. And the Washington Times covered the hell. And people said, "Well, you have 10-1 circulation advantage over the Washington Times." I said, "The people that matter, it's 1-1. It's 1-1 on Ben Bradley's desk. It's 1-1 on George Solomon's desk. You never have." You never felt you were out and you could be out in front because something was always happening. But yeah, it was, Joe was unbelievable. He would, one day he's eating, he would eat. He said, "I used to look over there at Tom Landry in December. Tom is the tie is in place. He's perfect. He's tanned. And I've gained 30 pounds and haven't seen the sunlight in 3 months." And I said, "Yeah, but he goes home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, has dinner with his wife every night. You sleep at the office." They're going to play the Eagles in the '90 playoffs. And Ray Didinger, I think he works at NFL Films now. Ray Didinger and Joe and I, and there might have been one others, are on the field. And Ray says, "Did you hear what Buddy Ryan said about you today?" "No." Joe's got his arms folded, and he's saying, "No." He goes, "Well, someone asked him if Gibbs is uptight." And Buddy Ryan made a puckering face, meaning Joe is so tight you couldn't pull a hair out of his butt with a blah, blah, blah. And I'm talking, Ray's talking, and as Ray related later on the NFL Films, that I said, "Hey, Joe, you can jump in here anytime now." And he wouldn't say anything. And Ray says, "When's the last time you've been home?" "Hey, I'm getting sick of that. I go home." And Ray says, "Well, Joe, your car's the only one in the parking lot with snow still on it." And Joe looks at him and goes, "Gosh dang it, I got to have somebody take that snow off the car." And he all week, I have never been around a team. I was staying at the team hotel that you're actually afraid of them. I get on the elevator the night before the game and they're like, "Don't F with us." And I said to Joe, the next day, he got Buddy Ryan fired that game. I said, "When did you know you were going to win?" He goes, "The first snap of the game, the line of scrimmage exploded. We knocked him 7 yards off the ball. I knew we were in pretty good shape." And before the Super Bowl, before the last 2 Super Bowls, Emmett Thomas, the secondary coach, whispers, "I would not want to play us this week." They're in Minneapolis for Super Bowl 26. They have to cut practice on Thursday because the coaches are afraid somebody's going to get killed. They are practicing. They are playing at such a level. And remember, the Bills had more talent. The Bills had all these Hall of Famers, Cornelius Bennett and Bruce Smith and Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas. And I would always ask Casserly, but like he would sit in with the coaches, Charlie Casserly, the GM, like, what are they saying? What are they saying? And he would say, they're saying they have like 7 guys that can win the game, but we have Gary Clark. And we have Wilbur Marshall, who was he didn't know it at the time, was about to play the best game he ever played for the franchise. And they won the game.
Amazing stuff. And the playoff game that you referenced, January 5th, 1991, a 26 Redskins win at the Philadelphia Eagles in the wild card round of the NFL playoffs for the 1990 season. The Skins had lost at the Eagles 28-14 on Monday Night Football on November 12th, 1990 in a very famous game, the body bag game. But the Skins got the last laugh with that playoff win at the Eagles.
I'm late there. I'm there late one day. And Joe comes in like I once walked into his office when you could wander around, opened the door to his office, and all I saw was a sofa with a pillow and a blanket on it and a Bible that was open. And I said to him later, I said, I was sneaking around and looked in your office and told him what I had seen. I said, what were you? The Bible was open. I said, what were you reading? He said, I'm reading about King David, a guy that was the world saw as wealthy, but he was completely poor. And he goes, that's how I feel about this job sometimes. Like he told me one night, Coy, his youngest son, he goes, I went to kiss Coy goodnight. And I looked down and there's this 6'2", 210-pound thing with a beard and a linebacker. And he said, I started to cry. I had missed it all. And that was the price he paid. And then when he left, I went with him to one of Coy's games at Stanford, and he was going to get that time back. And the last time I talked to him after JD was at the end of his life, he had early onset Alzheimer's, his oldest son, who was the perfect kid. And he says, I said, I just want to see how you're doing. And he says, I know what a broken heart is now. I'll never go to bed happy another night in my life. And he goes, I know God's hand is in this, but I can't see it. And I told Joe's secretary later, I said, that's the saddest man I've ever been around. I haven't spoken to him since Coy died. So it's, I think he's channeled it to the grandkids.
Yeah, and Joe Gibbs has had tremendous success as owner and founder of Joe Gibbs Racing, 5 NASCAR Cup Series championships. Legendary sports writer Richard Justice, he worked for the Washington Post from February 1986 to July 2000, including serving as a Redskins beat reporter and columnist. He was a Redskins beat reporter for the Post for the team's 1991 Super Bowl championship season. Richard, you have been very generous with your time. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you for having me out.
Well, the Washington Capitals' longest road trip in the NHL's 2025-2026 regular season at last is over. They ended up going 2-3-1 on the trip. This trip was not easy. Nothing is easy for the Caps right now, but they concluded the trip with a win, albeit a win in which they choked away a significant lead, a 4-3 shootout win at the Detroit Red Wings on Thursday night. The Caps won despite blowing a 3-1 third period lead as they gave up 2 even-strength goals over the final 140 of the third period, but the Caps did win. The Caps in the NHL's 2025-2026 regular season now are 26-22-7, including just 9-13-5 over their last 27 games, and now have 59 points, good for 4th place in the 8-team Metropolitan Division. Now, the Caps for this shootout win at the Red Wings on Thursday night were without multiple key guys, including The team's number one goaltender, Logan Thompson, was not available due to an upper body injury. The Caps on Thursday morning announced having recalled goaltender Clay Stevenson from their AHL affiliate, the Hershey Bears. The Caps' starting goaltender for this game was their number two goaltender, Charlie Lindgren. He stopped just 18 of the 21 shots on goal that he faced, and he committed a second-period tripping minor, third consecutive game for Lindgren in which he committed a tripping minor. Also, he during the game got hurt, but he stayed in the game for its entirety. The choice was to have Lindgren play in the shootout while injured or bring in Clay Stevenson to play in the shootout completely cold. This was a wild game. The Caps did go 4 for 4 on the penalty kill. The puck possession battle was about even. The Caps had 23 shots on goal to the Red Wings 21, and per natural stat trick had 41 5-on-5 shot attempts to the Red Wings 42, though that included the Caps having 6 5-on-5 high-danger shot attempts to the Red Wings 3. Caps defenseman Matt Roy did not play for a second consecutive game due to a lower body injury, and the Caps remain without center Pierre-Luc Dubois. He has been out since getting injured in the Caps' 3-1 loss to the New York Islanders at Capital One Arena on October 31st. He, on November 7th, underwent surgery to address injuries to his abdominal and adductor muscles, was expected to miss 3 to 4 months. So the Caps did get back defenseman Rasmus Sandin. He returned from a one-game absence caused by a lower body injury. A terrific game for Caps top-line center Dylan Strome. He scored an even-strength goal, 9:36 into the third period for his 15th goal in this regular season. He had a secondary assist for his 29th assist in this regular season. He went 10-4 on faceoffs, and he was tied for number one on the Caps in 5-on-5 shot attempt percentage for the game per natural stat trick at 66.67. The Caps with Strome on the ice in 5-on-5 situations in the game had 18 shot attempts versus allowing 9 shot attempts. How about who scored the game-winning goal in the shootout?
And it's on the stick of Nick Dowd. The Capitals, through it all, can win the game here. Dowd will cut across, left side, in on Gibson, slow down, look, backhand, scores! And the Capitals win it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Detroit. It was a thrill ride, but the Capitals win it in the shootout. A final score here tonight, 4-3.
John Walton on the Washington Capitals radio network. Caps third-line center Nick Dowd. He scored the game-winning goal in the shootout and scored an even-strength goal, 6:27 into the first period for his third goal in this regular season. Also, he had a game-high 6 hits as the Caps out-hit the Red Wings 26-13. Did go just 6-11 on face-offs. Good game for the Great Eight. Caps top-line right wing Alex Ovechkin. He had a primary assist for his 24th assist in this regular season. Also, he had a team-high 7 total shot attempts, including a team-high 4 shots on goal. He registered 3 hits, and he was number 5 on the Caps in 5-on-5 shot attempt percentage for the game per natural stat trick at 62.96. The Caps with Ovi on the ice in 5-on-5 situations in the game had 17 shot attempts versus allowing 10 shot attempts. So the Caps did go 0 for 2 on the power play. The Caps healthy scratches for this shootout win at the Red Wings on Thursday night were winger Sonny Milano and defenseman Dylan McElrath. The Caps this weekend have one game home to the Metropolitan Division leading Carolina Hurricanes Saturday evening at 5. Whereas the Washington Capitals just concluded a 6-game road trip, their longest road trip in the NHL's 2025-2026 regular season, the Washington Wizards are in the midst of a 5-game homestand, their longest homestand in the NBA's 2025-2026 regular season, and they so far are 2-0 on the homestand.
8-0 Wizards run, 109-99. Kuzma, hash mark right wing for 3, it's off the rim. Rebound comes off Middleton. Middleton gets it, and he's going to tiptoe to victory across midcourt. Hey, the Wizards make it 2 in a row. Why not? Let's have some fun at home. On John Wall night, you have to win, right? The Wizards did. 109-99. Wizards. Well, maybe they did it for John Wall. They win by 10 over the Milwaukee Bucks.
Dave Johnson on the Washington Wizards radio network. A 109-99 win over the Milwaukee Bucks at Capital One Arena on Thursday night. Our rebuilding and tanking Wizards in this regular season improved to 12-34. They at this game held John Wall celebration night off him having announced his retirement this past August. The first 15,000 fans in attendance each was to receive a John Wall bobblehead. A nice gesture by the Wizards for one of the best players in franchise history. Now, the Bucks for this game were without multiple players due to injury, including the Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He did not play due to a right calf strain and off him wanting to be traded. ESPN NBA insider Shams Charania, he on Wednesday morning in an ESPN.com piece reported that Antetokounmpo, quote, is ready for a new home ahead of the February 5th trade deadline, end quote. But the Wizards remained without multiple key guys. Trae Young did not play for a 10th time in 10 games since being acquired by the Wizards via trade on January 9th. He's not playing due to a right knee sprain and a right quadriceps contusion. Marvin Bagley III was not available for a fourth consecutive game. He, for a third consecutive game, was not available due to a thoracic strain. He, for the first game, was not available due to illness. Tristan Vukcevic was not available for a seventh consecutive game. He, for a fifth consecutive game, was listed as dealing with a left hamstring strain. He, for the first two games, was listed as being out due to left knee soreness. And Cam Whitmore is done for the season. The Wizards on January 15th announced that he had started the recovery process for a diagnosed venous condition and would miss the remainder of the season. The Wizards in this win over the Bucks on Thursday night led for all of the second, third, and fourth quarters. So though the Wizards did allow an 18-point second quarter lead to get trimmed to just 2 points in the fourth quarter at 101-99, but the Wizards then ended the game on an 8-0 run, one despite shooting poorly from the field, just 8 for 35 on threes and just 30 for 61 on twos, but the Wizards went 25 for 28 on free throws versus the Bucks going 7 for 9 on free throws. So the Wizards had 28 free throw attempts to the Bucks 9. The Wizards held the Bucks to just 10 for 38 on threes, and the Wizards out-rebounded the Bucks 61-43, including having 18 offensive rebounds to the Bucks 7, and thus 23 second chance points to the Bucks 13. So a lot of good stuff from the Wizards in this game, even with them shooting poorly from the field. 5 key young players for the Wizards: Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, Bub Carrington, and Trey Johnson combined for 68 of the Wizards' 109 points. The two biggest bright spots for the Wizards this season, Alex Sarr and Keyshawn George, again were good. Alex Sarr in 31 minutes, 31 seconds as a starter had 16 points, 17 rebounds, including 7 offensive boards, 2 blocks, and 2 assists versus 2 turnovers. Did go just 1 for 3 on threes and just 5 for 10 on twos, went 3 for 4 on free throws. The Wizards' leading scorer was Keyshawn George. He in 35-33 as a starter had 23 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists versus 1 turnover and 2 steals. Went just 2 for 8 on threes and just 8 for 16 on twos, went 1 for 1 on free throws. The Wizards this weekend have 2 games, home to the Los Angeles Lakers Friday night at 7 and home to the Sacramento Kings Sunday evening at 6. And that'll do it for you and me for now. Keep the feedback coming. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Monday show, episode 1251. We'll have a lot for you on the Washington Commanders. Also on Monday's show, discuss the Washington Capitals, the Washington Wizards, and college basketball. The Caps this weekend have 1 game, home to the Carolina Hurricanes Saturday evening at 5. The Wizards this weekend have 2 games, home to the Los Angeles Lakers Friday night at 7, and home to the Sacramento Kings Sunday evening at 6. And college basketball this weekend includes Maryland, home to number 12 Purdue Sunday afternoon at 1. Georgetown at Butler Saturday at noon. Number 17 Virginia at Boston College Saturday afternoon at 1:30. Virginia Tech home to number 4 Duke Saturday at noon. George Mason at St. Bonaventure Saturday evening at 6:30. George Washington home to Fordham Saturday afternoon at 2. And VCU home to Loyola Chicago Friday night at 9. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday.
Let's see who'll win this battle of strategy.
Riggins. He's going to go all the way, unless Blackwood can catch him.